So hope everybody's in the right spot. I apologize that my web camera is not working today. Hopefully by next week we'll have it up and working, but just for today, I'll be just a voice out there someplace in the mountains of New Mexico. But part one today is recognize the communication abilities of learners with significant disabilities. Hope you all are in the right spot. This is the groundwork we're going to cover over the course of these 3 sessions, talking about the framework for the development of expressive communication, the communication matrix itself, and the implications for instruction. Assessment that does not lead to improved student performance serves no useful purpose. Normally, at this time, I would ask folks how that resonates with them. How do you feel about that statement? I, for one, am a big believer in that. I think that our time is pretty valuable as educators. I think that assessment is a very important process, and I think it should drive what we do as teachers, how we instruct and what we instruct. So, what is your idea of a good assessment? Now, Tessa, I'm going to need some help here because I'd like to see some folks how they might respond to this.
Sure. So everyone, you have that Q&A box. Go ahead and open that and type in your response, and Philip and I will read those. A mix of standardized and dynamic assessments.
All right.
A good assessment needs to provide information about the student's current levels of achievement.
All right. Their competencies, I'm hoping.
How about a couple more? Anyone else? Culturally appropriate.
Very good.
I've used observations as well as other formal and informal assessments.
Okay. So assessment tools that allow, and I guess the term here would be authentic type of assessment tools. Assessment tools that allow for the child to be observed and assessed in his natural environment around topics and experiences that are familiar to him, culturally familiar to him, culturally sensitive to him and his experiences. As far as an assessment tool that allows for observation, I think that particularly with this population, we need to be able to access information about our learner through more than just direct assessing. Observation and interview of those people that are familiar with that child certainly will broaden our perspective and our understanding of that child's strengths and competencies. Very good. Thanks so much. I think we're on the right page. And I hope that as we talk about assessment today, particularly the communication matrix, you'll see some of those very attributes in this particular tool. I, for one, believe that this tool really does rise to the level of a meaningful assessment, as it does provide that level of authenticity. It does provide that level of collaboration. It does provide that level of sensitivity that allows us to capture the changes and strengths of our learners with significant disabilities. How many of you are familiar with the communication matrix? Stacy raised her hand. Good. Jamie, all right. Okay. Well, hopefully you guys will keep me honest on this as I describe it. I've used this tool since its inception in 1990. I worked with Dr. Charity Rowland as her project coordinator on 17 federally funded research efforts during that time. So, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, I hope that you become so and are interested in at least attempting to use it in the future. Assessment of communication is about learning what the child understands about the world and how that child perceives his or her relationship to it. Okay. So what does it take to communicate? I hope everybody's thinking. There we go. Do we have an answer?
Yeah, we have a couple. Language, a sender and receiver,
Okay.
verbal and nonverbal,
Okay. Different modes.
an ability to interact.
Very good. Very good. So 2 out of those 4 responses had to do with a modality, and another one had to do with a communication partner. And I guess the third one, the fourth one as well, did the ability to interact. How about the desire to interact?
And Jamie says sometimes it requires anything and everything you can think of to make communication successful.
Yes, 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 yes. Symbolic communication is an outgrowth of early relationships between infants, caregivers, and the objects or events in their environment. So all the time we spend with our learners, developing that relationship with them and helping them experience the world around them will contribute to their development of symbolic communication. We can describe that process this way. Communication involves a sender, our learner. It involves somebody to receive the message, somebody to interact with, something to communicate about, and a means of expression. I hope that works for you guys. Of these 3 or 4 variables here, these 4 elements of communication, which ones do you think we tend to focus on most often when we talk about our learners' abilities to communicate?
Kelly says sender. In my case, it's easiest to focus on the sender and means of expression, the means of expression.
All right. Was that all Kelly, or were those several different answers?
Several different answers.
Good. Okay, I would agree with you guys. I think that most often our tendency is to focus on that means of expression. And very often that really is looking at their symbolic means of expression. So today, hopefully we will expand that notion of means of expression to include some pre-symbolic strategies as well. But more importantly, I think that it's important to consider our sender, our receiver, and topic as all very, very significant issues as it relates to the development of our child's communication abilities. I do believe that way too often we focus primarily on means of expression and not give enough time or attention to their access to the world around them to give them something to communicate about, or developing a relationship with them so that there is that desire to communicate, or for our sender, helping him or her begin to understand that their behavior matters and that they can have an impact on the world around them. So let's take a quick look at each of those 4 pieces individually. And I should say that the communication matrix is heavily influenced by the work of Werner and Kaplan, who described the development of symbolic communication in terms of those 4 elements and the relationship between those as communication develops. So that is the reason I wanted to spend some time here. Also, to begin to expand our way of looking at how we intervene, how we instruct, and how we help promote our learners' communicative competence. It's not all about teaching them sign language or teaching them how to point to a picture or giving you an object symbol. It has a lot to do with that relationship piece. It has a lot to do with access to the world around them to give them something to communicate about. But first of all, for our sender, helping them develop a sense of who they are. That doesn't happen in isolation. That requires you. That requires instruction. Helping them to develop a notion that their behavior has an impact on the world around them. Or as Watson said, the recognition of the association between one's behavior, environmental outcomes is critical for future learning. What does he mean by that? Any thoughts? What's John Watson talking about there? And why is that so important? Any thoughts?
Means and skills.
Means and skills? Somebody else?
Cause and effects.
Yeah, there we go.
When one recognizes they can affect their environment, they continue to reach out.
That's right. That's right. If you didn't perceive that your behavior mattered, that your behavior had an impact on the world around them, would you bother to try?
It gives a child power when he realizes he can control things around him.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And perception that my behavior can change things around me.
Absolutely.
Behaviors can communicate needs and default alter their communication environment. By default, she corrected. Behaviors can communicate needs and by default alter their communication environment. Thank you, Jamie.
All right. All right. Very good. I think we all are on the same page here. Pretty darn important. When we think about our receiver, the person interacting with the learner, receiving the message, Wilcox suggests some very critical components of partner responsivity. And one is that it is sensitive. The recognition of communicative or potentially communicative behavior on the part of our learner. That our responses are contingent. They are contextually related and timely responses to potentially communicative behavior. And that they are predictable or consistent. Responding to the same behavior in the same ways over time, so that our learner begins to understand that his behavior matters, and also that there is some specific meaning to the various behaviors that they demonstrate. I would add one more piece to this list from Wilcox, and that's this: expectation. That we as receivers must have the expectation that our learners can and do respond. Because without that, we're just going through the motions. If we don't honestly believe and allow for the time for and present information in a way that is meaningful to them, then we have no expectation that they will respond. A very, very important fourth piece to that. As you read this by Miles and McCletchy, tell me what you think they're talking about. A deaf-blind child will have difficulty developing accurate ideas about the world unless she has at least one trusting, significant, meaningful relationship to serve as a center from which to explore the world in gradually widening circles. What are they describing here? Any thoughts?
Something needs to be predictable and constant. Otherwise, everything is just a mystery and confusion.
All right.
This person is her way to reach out to the environment around her. It would happen slowly.
Okay. Do you think this applies to just children who are deafblind?
And people are saying no.
Good. Have you heard the term secure base or anchor as it relates to relationships?
Yes, yes. Kelly wrote attachment, and Bonnie wrote the lens that one sees the world through is dictated by what they are exposed to and the environment provided to them by one who they can trust.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Very good. Yep. That's kind of my take on this too, especially as I think about a secure base. What this suggests to me is that once that child has that relationship, that trust, that sense of safety and security with a provider, a caregiver, a communication partner, then the world around them becomes a little less daunting. And they feel a little bit more safe in beginning to explore that world. And I would ask you, how many times have you witnessed this yourselves with a typically developing child? Just think about the playground or in the park. And that little child, that little toddler, is venturing towards the swing set or the slide or the sandbox, but he keeps checking back to make sure that mom or dad are still sitting there, are watching, are nearby. That's kind of the image I get when I read this. And I think it really does a whole lot in terms of reinforcing the notion that that relationship, that sense of attachment, that sense that you get me is so very, very important as we look at issues as it impacts our child's ability and desire to want to communicate with somebody else. It's not all just about signs or pictures or object symbols, is it? Topics. Well, that's part of that secure base, isn't it? Our learners figure out about the world around them in the context of interactions with other people. As Werner and Kaplan said here, the act of reference emerges not as an individual act, but as a social one. We don't just hand our child a toy and say, figure it out. We're figuring it out with them, aren't we? We're helping them to develop strategies for exploring. Okay? And as de Thorne would suggest, communication is supported through shared histories people bring to their interactions. This time that you're spending with the learner, exploring the world around them, provides them not only a sense of relationship with you, but also experiences upon which to develop potential interests and motivations. Our kids don't figure out things. They don't figure out the world around them simply by trying it once, do they? And think about our learners with significant sensory disabilities or significant orthopedic impairments. What is their access to the world around them without you? Any thoughts?
It would be limited. Without one to share and teach, their access is very limited.
Even more basic than that, think about the child with a significant sensory impairment, a significant vision impairment.
Someone says it brings to mind the feral child, Jeannie. And as a teacher, I'm often the gateway for many of my students. I provide the access and opportunities.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in doing that, I would suggest that you are teaching communication, that you are providing communication intervention through providing that access.
They need to be provided with appropriate access from Jamie.
Yes. Because they don't have it on their own, do they? They physically may not be able to access these things. They physically may not be able to manipulate them in such a way that they gather information about the properties of these various potentially interesting topics, things to communicate about. They visually may not be able to observe other people doing that and thereby gain some interest or motivation to want to explore these things. So yeah, they need you to help them explore that world around them in a safe and secure environment. And surprisingly enough, one of the most critical steps in communication development is that of joint attention. And where do you suppose that is developed? Yep, it's developed in the context of these shared experiences with our learners. So unless we're providing that, we're really stifling their chances at developing that so important shared, joint, dual attention, which is very, very important to the emergence of communicative intent. Take a look at this guy.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now I know my A, B, C. Next time, won't you sing with me? Yay! Good job! Yay!
So that was David. Do you think that was a shared experience?
And while those are coming in, there was a question, is the adult providing the alphabet?
Is the adult providing the alphabet? I couldn't attest to that. I mean, I think here she's obviously providing it verbally as part of their interaction. I'm not sure I'm following the question.
The vocalization of the alphabet, she clarified.
Vocalization of the alphabet. She is singing it. Is that what you're asking? She's not targeting him articulating the alphabet.
Okay, she says yes, that's what she was asking.
Okay.
Okay, and people are saying absolutely, yes, absolutely. She could be waiting expectantly within the communication interaction for the student to respond. Yes, his smile indicated that he was enjoying the interaction and the teacher waiting for him to make a move before continuing the song.
And vice versa. David's attention was certainly, and his behavior was certainly driven by hers. You had all the makings of that turn-taking back and forth of a typical conversation, yeah? And David's interest was on a lot more than the drum, wasn't it? I mean, he was learning about drum, he was learning about making those noises and all of that good stuff, but he was learning that his behavior matters to her. So do you think down the road, drumming like this with that toy, with that person might become a topic that David wants to communicate about? I'm going to hazard a guess here. I'm going to say yes. Okay.
A couple people saying yes. Yes, I could see that happening. Sure, he might want to be able to ask to do it again. He was seeing that his behavior affected what the teacher did and recognizing her response to him.
So there was a great deal of emerging joint attention, wasn't there? Yeah. Weatherby and Present and others suggest this. First words are intimately tied to children's experiences with objects or persons. First words are recalled by repeating experiences. So everything we're doing through sharing experiences with our learners are contributing not only to their list of possible things that they might want to communicate about, but also providing them the model and the experiences to learn just how to do that. How they explore and how much they explore provides them with cues and associations thereby influencing their ability to recall objects and events in their world. So, next time David sees that drum, and probably that was not the first time David had that experience with his teacher, was it? That was something they'd more than likely done a number of different times. And odds are good that when David sees that drum, it's going to be enough to remind him of the whole interaction that goes along with that drum and helps him recall that experience. Means of expression. This is the fourth element. And I don't think it's accidental that I discuss this element fourth, because I do think that as I look at the 43 years I've been in the field, the majority of times we've talked about communication for our learners with significant disabilities, it has focused on their means of expression. And yeah, I think it's wonderful that as we talk about the means of expression, at least that discussion has broadened to pre-symbolic, non-symbolic communicating. That's all a good thing. As we said earlier on, there's a lot more that goes into communicating than simply having a way to do it. And as we've just discussed, it has a lot to do with our learner developing a sense that his behavior matters to you, that he has a reason and a desire to want to communicate to you, and a sense of safety, that he has access to topics provided by you to the world around him, something to communicate about. All of those things, and not just means of expression, really begin to define communication intervention, if you will. So means of expression, the fourth element, not an unimportant one, but certainly not the most important one. Consider this. When the focus is on successful communication, the form is reduced to its proper place of being a means towards an end rather than the end itself. If you'd like to comment about that, please do. Otherwise, just ponder that for a moment. This statement really puts what we're talking about in perspective, doesn't it? Are you okay with that statement? Do you agree with it?
I think sometimes we forget that.
I would agree.
Susan agrees.
Okay. So here we go. Here are the four elements that we've just discussed. And what happens as communication evolves, as communication develops, the relationship between these four pieces evolves as well. And I'll try to illustrate that for you. So when you think about the relationship between the sender and the receiver, or the sender and topic. Let's take sender and topic here, okay? That newborn, what does he want to talk about? Any thoughts about what his agenda is?
Food. Food and comfort. Yep. Food, sleep, snuggles, changing. What's going on around him? Getting needs met. Mm-hmm. Diaper change.
Mm-hmm. Pretty much internal stuff, right? Pretty much internal stuff, with the exception of those startle responses to external events. Absolutely. But it's about getting comfort and expressing comfort and discomfort, isn't it? Getting those basic needs met. And he doesn't know, or she doesn't know at that time, what those needs are or how I can best meet those. Okay? But think about that learner, that same learner, 18 months later, or 2 years later? And what are his topics likely to be or likely to include?
Still self-focused, but at a much higher level. What they can see and touch. Food, toys, play outside.
Good.
When they can play and with what.
Yeah, so
Pleasure.
all these topics that you've now exposed them to, or that they've had access to through observing other people do them. Absolutely. Absolutely. And sure, those basic needs don't go away. But as we look at the next one, topic and means of expression, that newborn expresses his topic how?
Crying.
Yep. That toddler might express his needs or wants or interests how?
Crying or smiling.
The toddler?
Speaking short phrases by getting what they want.
Gesturing, taking you to the thing they want, bringing the thing they want to you, early emergent symbolic communications, single word utterances, absolutely. Maybe even emerging sentences. Absolutely.
Jay Lee says crying, some words, gestures, taking you to what he wants.
Good. Very good. So that development, that evolution, if you will, is referred to as progressive distancing. So the relationship between those elements, whether it's topic, means of expression, sender, receiver, those all grow, they expand, they evolve over time. And each one takes on a new form. Each one maybe takes on a greater or lesser significance. I would suggest to you that early on, our learner is just figuring out that his behavior matters. And topics are limited. Topics have mostly to do with their comfort. Their means of expression is pretty singular. It's smiling or crying, cooing or crying. But as that changes, we see a learner who is no longer stuck in his immediate space and time. He's interested in much more. He's able to communicate about those things, whether those things are present or absent, with the use of symbols. Progressive distancing, okay? So the relationship between those elements, I believe, are reflected here in these 7 stages, okay? And this is the model of expressive communication development that the matrix covers. Hopefully you guys have downloaded this or will soon do that. Those 3 or 4 of you that are familiar with the communication matrix already will recognize these 7 levels. But as you look at that, you can see that they essentially cover that newborn stage to that emergent language stage, which, if you have to assign kind of a age to it, we're talking probably 24 to 30 months. Okay. So it's really the matrix is really designed to look at the early stages of communication development. And certainly there will be learners who exceed this and for whom the matrix is no longer appropriate. But for so many of our kids with significant disabilities, the matrix has proven to be a very, very valuable tool in really shining a light on where their competencies are right now, where their strengths are right now, putting a very heavy emphasis on that pre-symbolic stage of communication development. So let's take a look at each one of these levels. Are there any questions so far? You're all doing okay?
Yes, thanks. Jay Lee, where do you find the communication matrix? I put the link to all the handouts in the chat window, so you can find it there. And Carol, yes, you'll find the link in the chat window. And
Okay.
Bonnie says, I think you were doing a great job of explaining.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It's hard to have a conversation when I don't see you guys, or hear you guys, but I'll trust that you're there. And I also trust that if you have a question, or if I've said something that doesn't resonate with you, or that you want some clarification on, that you will ask that question. And Tessa, thank you for reading them off to us so that we can respond and have that interaction. So this video, I'm going to let it run, and it's going to describe each of the 7 levels for you. And then we're going to come back and go over them and handle any one of your questions that you might have about the difference between those levels, if that works.
Here we go. Oh, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. You want more run, Homero? Oh, you want more run? Okay, ready, go. Oh, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. Stop. You want more run? Good job. All right. Oh, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. Do you want more run? Yeah, you want more run. All right. Oh, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. Do you want more run? Good job. All right, here we go. Oh, run, 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 run. Run, 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 run. Homero, do you want more run? Okay, we're finished with run. Let's try this. Ready? Shake, 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 shake. Shake, 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 shake. Homero, do you want more shake? You want more shake. Good job. Okay, ready? Shake, 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 shake. Shake, 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 shake. Okay, sure. Okay, you bet. Here we go. Okay. Yeah? We're finished. Finished. Here, let's play on. I know. Is it choice? Go with the choice? Yeah. Rocker. Trampoline. Which one do you want to do? Huh? What are you going to do? The trampoline. Okay. That was nice. Gonna bounce. Woo! Woo! Come here. Yeah, do. Yeah, bounce. Oh, you want me to bounce with you? Okay. Woo! Okay. Yeah. What do you want us to dance? Okay. Do you want to turn? No? Okay. Do you want this? Oh, you want the piano? Okay. Listen to that. Yes. Okay, Adam. Piano. It's my turn. Well, what? What? You want this? Adam, do you want this? Yes, you do. Okay, there you go. Oh, that's fun. Good for you. Yeah. Adam, it's my turn. Yes, your turn? Huh? You gonna take a turn? That's pretty neat, isn't it? Okay, Adam, it's my turn. Thank you. Although it is more critical to teach an individual to communicate competently with a large vocabulary using the current level of representation, learning to use more abstract symbols is also an important method of continuing progress. Adam initially used three-dimensional symbols. Later, he progressed to using two-dimensional symbols. What do you want? Want crackers? Sarah used to have sight and had learned to use picture symbols. When she lost her sight, she quickly switched to using three-dimensional symbols made from parts of familiar objects. Later, she began using thermoformed symbols, which are thin plastic impressions of her original symbols. These are more abstract since they carry less information. An advantage is that they are more portable.
Alberto can see, but he is very dependent on tactile information. He uses his fingers in his mouth before he will experiment with anything. Later on, Alberto began to develop some speech. He still needed his tangible symbols, but we encouraged him to use his speech along with the symbols.
What is it? Head. Yes, it's their head. Thank you.
Catherine's speech was not developing as expected, but she quickly learned to express herself using picture symbols. As her confidence developed, she began speaking, especially in conjunction with her use of the picture symbols.
Yes, that's yellow.
Eventually, Catherine learned to use speech without the support of the tangible symbol system.
Yes, it's a red chip.
Gina had a long history of using manual signs in an imitative fashion, but without apparent meaning. After she had become a competent communicator using tangible symbols, she began to use manual signs in a more meaningful fashion.
Good, right? Okay. Drinking the milk.
Okay.
Oh, is it your turn?
Quick,
Hamburger, please. You want me to cook it? Okay. Where's the spatula? Where's the spatula? Where's the spatula?
Okay. It's here.
Oh, thank you. Here's your hamburger. Eating it? Share please? Okay. Oh, thank you. Good hamburger. Mariah, do you want some corn?
Okay.
Corn. What? You? Corn for me? What do you want me to do? Oh, corn on the plate? Okay. Do you need some butter? Do you need some butter? No? Yes? Doesn't matter? Okay.
Oh, okay.
It's mine. You're eating.
You bad thing.
What's this? Tomato. Tomato, good, nice.
Audio came through, did it?
It did.
Oh, very good. Very good. We'll remember that for next time too. So I should have apologized right off the bat. I think I should have apologized. The videos and clips are fairly old. And I'm sorry for that. We constantly are trying to gather new. We have some in the makings, but for now, I think the important piece here is, and I hope that that didn't deter you from distinguishing each of the different levels as you watch this. The important thing is here that these 7 levels in early communication exist regardless of how dated the video is. With Peter, I think it's important here too to realize that what we're suggesting is that Peter, it's not so much that Peter does not yet possess purposeful behavior or that he doesn't do things with any intent. It's more about our ability as communication partners to interpret that behavior or to detect that purposefulness. Does that make sense? And so our job at this level really becomes to help create a more contingently responsive environment. If you recall Wilcox's suggestions there in terms of contingent responsivity and consistency, is to create an environment that is more consistently responsive, contingently responsive. But in order to do that, we have to be able to begin to determine behaviors that are within Peter's realm of doability and detectability for us. Okay? Level 2, that was Homero, run, 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 shake, 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 that little guy. So at this point, we see behaviors that are being demonstrated deliberately, but they're not yet done with the intent to communicate to his communication partner. Compare that to Brandon on the trampoline. So from your perspective, what you saw, what would you say are the differences between Homero, run, 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 and Brandon on the trampoline? Topics aside, what would you suggest are the major differences between levels 2 and level 3?
Level 3 showed a request that was provided by the child, not an answer to a request by the adult. A more intentional form of communication. The level 2, yes, the level 2 seemed to be moving to request that the activity continue, but it almost seemed like a reflex. In level 3, the child was clearly intentionally asking with his movements. Level 2 responds to questions, and number 3, child drives the communication.
Okay, okay.
for the run, 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 did Romero have to lift his legs? And for roll, 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 he had to wiggle? I was trying to distinguish the difference between the two actions he initiated.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, Homero in the run, 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 the partner responded to Homero lifting his leg during the pause and taking that or interpreting that as an indication that he would like to continue or reinstate that activity. When he did not lift his leg during that final pause, she said, okay, we must be done. What he did instead was to move his upper body, which she missed that signal from him. And she then introduced shake, shake, shake. Does that make sense? But he was using whole body movements or movements associated with the specific interactions to differentiate those two activities.
She says, yes, thanks.
Okay. Think about the 4 elements. In which of those 2 scenes could you identify all 4 pieces? Sender, receiver, topic, and means of expression. Maybe let me put it this way. In which of those scenes could you identify all 4 elements as being driven by the child?
The last one, level 3, level 3.
Good, good, good. That's a big deal. That is the difference. It's the difference between intentional behavior and intentionally communicative behavior. In Homero's case, the partner assigned meaning to the behavior of lifting the leg or shaking the upper body. In the Brandon instance, Brandon was driving that conversation. There was no interpretation done on the part of the communication partner at all. He was saying, this is what I'm talking about, and he was directing that behavior to her, as you could see by him taking her hand to the thing that he wanted to do, or holding her hands and then repeating part of the movement, in this case, jumping. The distinction between level 2 and level 3 is extremely, extremely important. I call it party time. When our kids move from 2 to 3, then I can begin to identify all 4 elements being driven by the learner. It is now that child's intent to affect the behavior of another person through his behavior about a specific topic. And at this stage, the means of expression are all going to be pre-symbolic or gestural. But Warren and Yoder describe this as a pivotal juncture of coordinated attention. I guess that's a little bit more professional sounding than party time, but in either case, it's a big deal. The transition from pre-intentional to intentional communication is a developmental milestone second to none. That's how big a deal these guys think it is. It marks children's entry as full participants in the social milieu around them and triggers other transactional processes that in a short time lead to symbolic communication. Okay, that second bullet there, it's a little bit mind-bending, but this is kind of what I take that to mean. What it means to me is that when our children hit that level 3, they are seeking out, and as a result of that, receiving increased engagement and interaction from other people. And with that increased engagement, they are getting more opportunities to practice and refine and enhance the quality of their communicative behavior. And through those interactions, they are receiving what they need to make that transition to symbolic communication and language development. At that point of level 3, Brandon, the child now is beginning to connect all of those 4 elements and recognizing his role in controlling those communicative interactions. He is seeking out the interaction from another person. He is establishing topic. And he is doing this primarily through the use of pre-symbolic gestural behaviors. It's a big, big deal. And if there are questions, and if we take it into next week with those questions, that is great, because this is such an important transition between levels 2 and level 3. How do you know that intentional communication is there? Weatherby and Present would suggest this. If it's child's intent to communicate, he's going to persist. He is going to try again to get his point across to you, okay? You will see indications of his attempts to direct behavior both to you and to what it is that he wants to communicate about. Now, alternating gaze is just one way of doing that. Our learners with visual impairments or orthopedic impairments, multiple impairments, may use other strategies for demonstrating that. The point is that there should be evidence of that behavior being directed by the child to you with an intended meaning. If possible, we will see our learners repair or change the signal they're using if the first one doesn't net the result they're seeking, okay? Many of our kids don't have that kind of a repertoire of behaviors to draw on. But to the extent that they do, we should encourage them to explore and utilize those other behaviors. There will be from our learner a waiting for a response. They do this, they communicate this to you with an expectation that you're going to respond in some way. And when you do, they will terminate their behavior, assuming that you respond in the manner that they're hoping you do, okay? So, level 3, intentional communication, not just intentional behavior, but intentionally communicative behavior. It implies intentional behavior, yep, but behavior that is purposely directed towards another person with an intended meaning. It requires a dual orientation to both the communication partner and the topic, however that might be. We might see it in some of our learners with their hand guiding behaviors, taking your hand to the thing that they want. Hey, you, this is what I want to talk about, or bringing you the topic for that interaction if possible, or looking at the topic and looking back at you, or some combination of that to indicate that dual referencing. Level 4 is still pre-symbolic, but as you look at this, it says conventional communication. And level 3 was unconventional communication. So what's the difference between between non-conventional and conventional? Any thoughts?
It is what most people would recognize as communication. Conventional in our society usually involves spoken language. Unconventional is usually more gestures, noises, etc. Conventional would be raising your hand to gain attention.
All right. Yeah, conventional gestures generally refer to those sorts of gestures that continue to be part of our expressive means even into adulthood. It could be waving, it could be pointing, it could be nodding our head yes, shaking our head no. Those sorts of things referred to as conventional gestures. They're recognized socially. Unconventional gestures generally or oftentimes will rely more on direct physical contact with the communication partner and or the topic. They're probably gestures that are not readily recognized or as readily recognized socially. They may be unique to that particular learner. In either case, though, they will both involve that dual orientation to topic and communication partner, okay? The interesting point here is between 3 and 4, as far as I'm concerned, they're equally significant. They both represent that pivotal juncture that Warren and Yoder were talking about. But for some of our learners with significant disabilities, they may not move readily or as in depth to that level 4. For example, why might a learner with a significant visual impairment not develop conventional gestures such as pointing? This isn't a trick question. It's pretty.
They aren't learning them from others.
Right. Okay. Which in fact is how most of us learn conventional gestures, right? Through observation and modeling from our environment.
Are level 3 and level 4 fluid, moving from one to the other?
Fluid. I'm not sure I understand the question. So help me out.
I think she might mean, can you go back and forth, or is it just 3 and then to 4? Is that right, Carol? Oh, can a child be both at level 3 and 4?
Absolutely. 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 Very good. Very good. Well, with regards to my question to you, a learner with a significant visual impairment may not point simply because he or she cannot see what there is to point to, right? A child with an orthopedic impairment may not point because he or she cannot physically form that motor behavior or produce that motor behavior. It's as simple as that. But yes, I think to your point, Carol, it is very possible for some of our learners to be able to acquire the use of some conventional gestures, but to the extent that their sensory and motor abilities allow. Does that make sense? What's important here is that you recognize the fact that not all of our learners will move from 3 to 4. And what is ultimately the most important is that whether it's 3 or 4, there is that intent to communicate. That's the pivotal juncture. That's party time. If they can utilize, if they can employ, if they can learn those conventional gestures, that's wonderful. If they cannot, my suggestion would be, your question to ask is, are they using these unconventional gestures across their day, across communication partners, across topics, demonstrating with fluidness that intent to communicate? And if the answer is yes, then I say, let's look at how we can move them into that symbolic stage of communicating. I mean, gestures, as you look at the screen now, gestures are great. They're effective. They're generic, which means I don't have to teach a different gesture to hand guide you to this object here versus this object here, or to point to one thing and learn how to refer to another thing in a different way. They're generic. I could point to any number of things, right? But they can only be used to communicate about those things that are happening now and in this space and time. Does that make sense? I cannot gesture about what I did last night. I cannot gesture about what I hope to do this weekend or what I'm thinking in my head, right? I need some symbolic way to refer to those things that are outside this time and space. So to the extent that our learners are ready to make that transition, that where their pre-symbolic base is solid, where they demonstrate a full understanding, full appreciation, and full control over those 4 elements of communication, then I say, let's go ahead and move them on to symbolic communication. Because at that point, then we really begin to shift our focus more specifically to a refined means of expression, because they understand topic. They continue to have experiences to gain in thoughts or things to communicate about. They understand relationship, and they certainly know who they are. Okay? So concrete symbols refer to symbols that have some shared feature with the thing in common, with the thing that stands for. I'm sorry. Okay? As opposed to abstract symbols, such as words or braille or most signs that really are artificially associated with what they represent. If you're not clear on what I mean there, think about the word shoe or the sign for shoe. What does that have to do with that thing on your foot?
We have a question, Philip.
Sure, sure.
So would a child, i.e. with autism, who uses some spoken words occasionally and can use taking my hand to get help opening something, i.e. to eat, but does not seek personal interaction and does not seem to be intentionally communicating with others, be considered at level 2 and emerging level 3?
So a child at level 2, I would also say the child, if he's speaking, has some words that he's using functionally, that he probably is emerging level 6 as well, which is very likely that our kids are operating at several different levels, or at least 2 different levels at any time. But, you know, the difference between mastered and emergent there is really dependent to me on where they demonstrate their communication most readily, most frequently. Okay. We'll get into that distinction, mastered versus emergent, just shortly here. But if that child has the intent to communicate, but withholding, and he demonstrates that through hand guiding you to a variety of things or bringing a variety of things to you, but he only does it with you or only does it on a certain number of things, then yeah, maybe that's an emergent skill. But if he does it pretty much when the opportunity is there, then my question would be, what prevents him from doing it with a wider variety of things or with more people? Is it just lack of experience? Is it just lack of practice?
Here's another one. What about a student with selective mutism? She will speak to only 1 or 2 people, but eye gaze, make facial expressions with everyone else.
And does she use any augmentative symbolic forms?
No.
Does she have the intent to communicate?
Definitely.
Definitely. So you would put her at a 3 or 4, pretty solid, huh?
I think so.
Okay. So have you explored other augmentative forms, other concrete forms, perhaps? 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional?
We've tried PECs. She won't
Okay.
exchange the symbols.
Well, you know, there's a lot of different ways for a learner to act on a symbol, whether it's a 2-dimensional or a 3-dimensional symbol. If they choose not to, I had a learner who would not give up the pictures because they were his pictures, but instead he would bring the picture to you, hold on to it, point at it, make sure that you saw it, and he would retain possession of that picture. So I guess my one thought is, without knowing this learner, what other strategies might, if that child is not willing to hand you the picture, what other strategies might they be willing to do, or what is their preference, or what is their default way of drawing your attention to the symbol? In PECs, the one thing about, and I don't want to, I'm not speaking ill of it, I'm simply saying that rarely have I ever seen one protocol work for every kid. And, you know, to the extent that PECs or other systems like that allow you some latitude to tailor it to that particular child, his abilities and his idiosyncrasies, if you will, then great. But I do have some concern about strategies that limit you in what your options are for that particular learner, because certainly these kids are very, very different one from another.
Her default is only using eye gaze or smiling. She'll reach out to grab you to get your attention, but then it is 20 questions if you aren't able to identify her communication intent.
Wow. Okay, so, but in using her eye gaze to, or can she use her eye gaze to indicate a symbol, to look at a symbol, to draw your attention to that symbol?
Yes, she does.
Well, there you go. I mean, what she's suggesting to you is that I prefer not to pick it up and hand it to you, but I will look at you and look at the symbol that I want you to observe. Am I right?
She says, yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's workable. That's workable. You can build a communication interaction around that if we don't get hung up on just how it is that that child is supposed to use this symbol as dictated by some curriculum or some specific approach. My criteria would be instead that whatever strategy you use or that you're accepting from the learner, it must both indicate a topic, in this case symbolically, as well as direct that topic to you. How they do that may very well be unique to that learner, but those are the things that you hold them to. How are you engaging me, and how are you referring to or drawing my attention to what it is that you want to communicate about? And eye gaze works perfectly well.
We have another comment. So back to the child with autism, I've tried introducing picture symbols, but the child does not seem to recognize that the symbol represents anything of significance, even when they are paired very closely. The child shows no interest in imitation of action or spoken sounds. The labeling of pictures quite often surprises me because almost all spoken language seems to be, I'm not sure how to pronounce this, echolalic, and just chattering to self.
Wow, I wish I could see these kids. I really, really do. It's tough to do this level of brainstorming with you, and I'm afraid we're going to run out of time here. But again, I guess so this child is the one that you're saying is primarily operating at level 2?
That is her best guess.
Okay. So then I wouldn't worry myself too much about how they might communicate symbolically yet. That's not where I put my energies. There's a big step between level 2 and level 5 or 6. You're missing potentially two or more stages there. And I think instead I would focus on how they, A, reinforcing my relationship with that child, B, increasing shared experiences with him, and looking at how they might, within the context of those shared experiences, demonstrate that joint attention. Okay, how do they bring me into this? How do they keep me engaged in this? Well, how do they terminate this activity? How do they let me know that they no longer want to do this? What's the range of the topics that they have perhaps to communicate about? Do I need to expand that? And that's not just giving them a bunch of pictures to look at or a bunch of toys to explore on their own. It is helping them explore those in the context of a social interaction with you. Okay. Boom. I think we should probably move on here. We can come back to these perhaps, but just real quickly, what's happening as we talked about progressive distancing earlier on, as that child moves through these 7 levels of expressive communication development? You see that the relationship between sender and receiver, the distance between sender and receiver evolves as that child's communication abilities evolve. The distance between sender and topic evolves as that child's experiences grow, as he becomes more aware of his environment and things to communicate about. And you see that child's ability to refer to things in his environment evolve over time, from crying or smiling to some symbolic way of representing these interests, these motivations, these things to communicate about. All of those are captured within the communication matrix. Okay. Wow. So for all this time, we've primarily focused on behaviors, how that child communicates to us. The other thing that the matrix draws your attention to is their reasons for communicating. You know, we said earlier in our discussion about that newborn or that very young child, they don't have a whole lot to communicate about. It's pretty much their behavioral state, whether they're comfortable or uncomfortable, okay? As that child becomes more aware of the environment around him, the world around him, so do their behaviors become more purposeful in acting on that world. We're still assigning meaning to those behaviors. When that child throws his cup, we're still trying to figure out why it is that he throws the cup, even though he did it intentionally. Are you mad? Do you want more? You didn't like what I put in it? Are you just trying to do a cause and effect thing and see what happens when you throw the cup? What is it? Okay. At level 3, all of the reasons for communicating continue to grow as that child's experiences grow. But what's happening here is that it is now his intent to communicate these things to you. We're not interpreting anymore, okay? But all of these pragmatic features, if you will, all of these reasons or intents for communication are being developed long before a learner ever has a symbol to do so, okay? At level 4, we see even more. Strategies or reasons for communicating evolve. By the time we hit symbolic communication, that child has a pretty solid base and a pretty solid understanding of what communication's about. And if you think about it, the only things he really can't do in early communication development is to label things or to request things that are not physically present or present right now, or to comment, right? Because you need a symbol to do that. But pretty much everything else I could do gesturally. Yeah? Which is pretty interesting when you think how many times we rush past this pre-symbolic foundation just to get to these symbolic forms, without realizing how much important work, how is being done foundationally, if you will, at that pre-symbolic level. It does, for me, beg the question, what's the hurry? Our kids are going to be a lot more successful symbolically, using words, learning to use pictures, or learning to use, object symbols or signs, if they understand what communication's about, if they have things to communicate about, if they have people that they want to communicate with, and if they know that their behavior matters to you. Okay, all of that's happening pre-symbolically. If they've got that, then they're off to the races. Because then we just begin to really start to shift our focus instructionally to some different means of expression, some different way of doing this, okay? So here's the matrix. This is the profile. And some of you now have experience with this tool. I would really encourage you to go visit the website. And we're not going to spend time on the website because it's there for you. It's there to access free of charge. It is pretty self-contained. It's a nice, if you take advantage of all the tools and resources that it links you to, it's going to be pretty informative. It's going to give you video examples of the different levels or what the question is that they're asking to help clarify for you. And what's equally as important is that it's available to parents as part of the IEP team, okay? So that they can come into the conversation about how their child communicates as fully prepared as you are as the teacher or as the SLP. On that note, I should mention that in your handouts, you also have a little 2-page form that it's called How My Child Communicates. And that is simply an abbreviated questionnaire based on the communication matrix that we put together for our families when we do home visits. It's a pretty simple, very brief questionnaire. It asks questions about how your child gains attention, how your child protests, how your child lets you know that what they're doing they want to do more of, and how your child makes requests. Probably the 4 most fundamental and most important early communication functions or intents. Okay, so that's there for you to look at too. That information, I should say, plugs directly into the communication matrix and would help you in completing that matrix. Okay, so as you look at the profile and you look at the tool, it's divided into 4 major reasons for communicating. Refusing things you don't want, getting things you do want, for social interaction, and for information sharing or gathering, okay? Think about that early communicator. They're not so much interested in the weather. They're not so much interested in what's happening on the news or that Tiger Woods just won something or da-da-da. They're mostly interested in being able to tell you they don't want something that's being forced on them, or that they do want something, and for gaining your attention. And those are represented in those earliest stages on the communication matrix. So as you look at the profile, you can see that as communication develops and that child's experiences with the world around him evolves or expands, so do the reasons for communicating, which are represented by those individual little boxes, okay? So the assessment tool itself is divided into 4 pages, each one focusing on one of these 4 major reasons: refusing, obtaining, social interaction, or information, okay? And it's pretty much self-directed. So for example, as you look at ways to obtain things, this page here, let's zoom in a little bit. Does your child request a new object? Okay. Right away, you look there in the description, it says, does your child intentionally, and that's in bold, that's bold. Does your child intentionally show you that he wants something new? So you know right away that we're talking about at least level 3, possibly 4, 5, 6, or 7, but at least level 3. So if you say, yeah, he does that, then you're going to go over to column 7 there and describe by circling or checking all the behaviors that that child uses to accomplish that intent. How does he do it? Does he guide your hand to or pull you over to the desired item? Does he look at you? Does he gaze back and forth between you and the desired item? Does he hand you a picture of the item that he wants, or an object symbol for the thing that he wants? Or perhaps form a sign, okay? By virtue of how you answer that, how you describe the behaviors he uses to accomplish that intent, you're beginning to identify where that child is on the communication matrix. All right? It's that simple. I think what the hard part is understanding the difference between the 7 levels, and most particularly between levels 2 and 3. And if you've got that, then using the matrix will be a piece of cake. Truly. Well, not figuratively. How's that? There you go. Criteria-wise, mastery versus emergent. It's as simple as this. There's no number. There is no set criterion given to you in the matrix. What it says instead is that the individual produces the behavior independently and consistently when the opportunity occurs. So, given the opportunity, you would predict that that child would demonstrate that behavior. Yeah, that's a mastered skill. An emergent skill, on the other hand, might be that, you know what, he'll do it, but he'll only do it if I set up the opportunity this way, or if it's only with me, or only home is reporting that right now, or he's only doing it at school, or he only does it around these 2 or 3 topics, or he does it with this level of assistance. That's an emergent skill. Okay? And then, of course, there's that third option, which is not present. Okay? So it is subjective in that way. But it is because you do the assessment through observation and interview with other people, other team members, family members that are familiar with this child, you arrive at a consensus. And that's what you reflect on your profile. Okay? So there's a profile that was done over 2 different administrations. Yellow representing the first administration, green representing a second administration, solid representing mastered, those hash marked cells representing an emergent skill, and the blank cells, obviously, skills not present yet. So it gives you a nice visual of the progress that learner is making. Here is the website. And again, I really encourage you to go take a look at this. www.communicationmatrix.org. So what we have discussed is exactly the same material that will be presented on the communication matrix. Okay, are there questions? No questions? Okay. We've only got like 8 minutes left, so I want to do this with you real quick. Do you have this? Did you pull up this handout? How many of you have that in front of you? Kelly, all right, great. So depending on how much time we have left, I'm going to try to get out of this screen and show you some video clips and you decide which statement best describes the learner in that clip, okay? Let's see if we can do that. Just a little bit of practice.
Yeah. Oh, Santana. Do you want more? Philip, let me know if there's something you want me to do. The last couple times she hasn't reached as much with this hand. Oh, do you want more? More? Yeah. And yeah. Yeah. Want more? More fan. More Santana? More fan? There. There it is. There's the fan. And
Any thoughts, you guys? Which one of those statements seems to best describe Santana?
I'd say the first. Another says B.
All right. So the big question here really is, does the behavior seem to be intentional?
We have another choice of B.
Okay.
Some A and some B.
Some A and some B. Okay. All right. Let's take a look at another one.
Did you like that? Huh? Let me have a little bit. I'll put some more on there, okay? Yeah. Okay. Like that. Like that. Give you some more. Give you some more. Okay. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, ay. Ay. A little bit.
All right, guys, that was Patrick. So which one of those, excuse me, which one of the statements best describes what you saw there?
A, C, C, C. We have a B and C.
All right. So I'll tell you where I come down on that one. Since that was my grandson, and I was just reinforcing his screaming, according to his mom, which I think is okay. A little payback. But anyway, what I see there is B. I'm looking for evidence of the dual orientation, which would take me to C. I'm looking for him to say, hey, Grandpa, not say, but gesture, direct his attention both to me and to the thing that he wants to talk about. At this point, I don't see him distinguishing the spoon from me. The spoon happens to be in my hand, so he's reaching for it. But there were a number of opportunities where he could have looked at me and then directed my attention to the spoon. I didn't see evidence of that dual orientation yet, even though there was a lot of intentional behavior. How does that work for you guys? Am I being too hard on him?
Makes sense.
You don't have to agree with me.
Wait, that surprises me a little.
It does, okay.
I can tell it takes practice to accurately identify. I can see what you mean by it being B, and I agree.
And I think it would be relatively easy to out or to set up opportunities to in this case, in his case, to more accurately distinguish the behavior directed to a partner from behavior directed to the topic. I think we could do that. But in the context of this video right now, and all we see in that clip there, it does appear as intentional behavior, that somehow screaming at that spoon is magically going to make it come to his mouth, or get more on it, or something like that, or reaching for it. But I would look for a little bit more before I gave him credit for intentionally communicative behavior. And now I think we are out of time, unfortunately. There are a couple more clips that might help clarify this. This is not a bad place to end the conversation for now, though, where we're pondering the distinction between 2 and 3, because that's such an important one to make. And like I said, when 3 is there, when that intent to communicate is clear to you, is evident to you, you have reached a very significant stage, that your learner has reached a very significant stage in his communication development. And think about the 4 elements.
Robin, did you want to jump on and close us out today?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I feel I'm here for I feel like a long haul trucker right around Idaho. So I want to welcome everybody. I got on a little late, but I want to thank Phil. I'm just thrilled you're here, and the work that you're doing and the information you're giving us is so incredibly important. So I want to thank all of you for joining us, and thank Phil, and look forward to next week. So good night, everybody, and happy Easter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll see you next week. Thank you.